Welcome, everybody, to this emergency live edition of Seahawks Forever. I'm stunned. I am still processing this. Usually when there's big breaking news, a big trade, someone's cut, an injury, whatever, there's a little bit of cushion, a little bit of time to put some things together, gather my thoughts, get some stats together, right? I barely had time to build a graphic to get this thing going. Now, Bryce Coots from the Hawk Zone Rundown should be joining me any minute. He doesn't have a lot of time, but I wanted to get someone else to get in here and help me react to this as well, as I can't wait to get all your comments and questions. Okay, here's what's happening. The Seattle Seahawks have traded Geno Smith to the Las Vegas Raiders for a third-round draft pick in this year's draft. That's it. That's the combination, the compensation being reported by everyone. This is how big this trade was. The first person that texted me and let me know what was happening was someone that I hardly ever text with, and a former coworker that I haven't seen in over a month. And we're not, they were kind of a part-time person there. We didn't talk to each other that much. Like, he wanted this. This was the text. This is exactly how he worded it. Geno traded in case you're not online. And he couldn't have timed it any better. I had just finished up some stuff from today. If you haven't checked out my full reaction to the DK Metcalf trade request, check that out when you get a minute. Was just shutting everything down to have a nice relaxing night at home with my lady and unplug and check out. So this is happening right now in real time, about as much as we could ever possibly have anything in real time. All right, let me adjust a couple of things here real quick. I'm going to bring Bryce in here and get his reaction to it, and then we'll try to hit this thing from every angle that we possibly can. How you doing, my friend?
Hey, Dan. I'm a little shocked. Heard some things last night, but wasn't sure. I kind of thought it was BS. I got a couple texts late last night saying, hey, some things might be happening. And I was like, kind of feeling out with a couple of my sources, and they were like, don't be surprised, there might be a shocker in Seattle tomorrow. And I thought, wow, hey, this is going to be DK.
Right.
And then just before the news broke online, and I actually called you, I got a tip from a friend saying, hey, this is about to break. Just be prepared.
It's crazy to me because, I mean, it just goes to show you that you can never believe what these GMs and coaches say, and that, or if what they do say is just true in the moment. Okay. It's, they have been adamant. There's been some mixed signals. There was a time where, Schneider said he's our quarterback until he isn't, right? That was a little bit weird. And then there was the time when Aaron Levine a couple of weeks ago asked McDonald, and it's kind of seemed like he wasn't prepared for the answer, but I also took it at the time to mean that he was just kind of tired of answering the question. And that's exactly what he said at the combine. He just gave a one-word answer when somebody asked him about Geno, whether he expects him to be on the team week one. And he said, yeah, I'm tired of that question. Let's move on. It's the only thing I can imagine, because I do believe everything they've said about Geno and how talented they think he is and what a match he'd be for the Kubiak offense is in their discussions between last Friday and today, the last 7 days, because that's when John Schneider said he was going to meet with Geno's agent and begin discussions, that what Geno was looking for had to have been so far beyond the realm of what the Seahawks were willing to do that they decided they had to make this move now.
Yeah, and so it was kind of interesting because after the combine, they obviously met there. We knew they were meeting there. I had texted a couple individuals saying, hey, it's been really quiet on the Geno front. Like, we haven't heard anything. Even to John's show yesterday, there was no real conversation around, hey, what's going on with Geno and his contract talks. And I got told they didn't go well. And the value that Geno was looking for and the length of what Geno was looking for didn't match with what Seattle wanted to pay. And then there's another caveat to this that kind of I've been told of recently. I got this news earlier about Geno, is that Sam Darnold's market is not what everyone thought it was going to be.
Yeah, that's been the buzz since the combine.
And so with that, it sparked Seattle's interest in him because John did all his homework on Sam Darnold his draft year. There was talk before that we were looking at Sam Darnold, and now Sam Darnold is probably the number one target for Seattle. So everyone was worried that Sam Howell is now going to be the starter.
Yeah.
It'll most likely be Sam Darnold, and they can get probably $15 million less per year with a Sam Darnold coming in than what they were looking to have to pay Geno, and you're resetting your quarterback room by 7 years. And again, the other thing I've heard is Seattle is very interested in this QB market in this draft class.
Well, we've talked for a long time, and I've been saying on the show for 2 years that I thought Schneider was going to be a Quinn Ewers guy when it was time for him to come out. But there's other guys, obviously, and now you get another top 100 pick in the mix in a class that's supposed to be very, very balanced all the way through the position groups. It just gives him one more opportunity to take one of those quarterbacks, and that would make sense. That was the first place my brain went to as well. There's no way they were just going to reboot the franchise and do a rebuild and go with a rookie quarterback. So the Sam Darnold stuff makes a ton of sense. We knew that Pete Carroll liked Sam Darnold back in 2021. And there was that Jay Glazer report that if they traded Russ that year, and that was the year that the big Bears rumor came out, right?
Yep.
That Darnold is where they would pivot to in trying to acquire him from the Jets at that time. And he was on shaky ground there anyway. They were ready to move on. And so I think that would have been an opportunity. Well, clearly Schneider was involved in that whole process and those discussions as well. And you're right. It seems to have cooled on him. I think the dominoes have fallen in such a way that it allowed this opportunity. Matt Stafford staying in LA, because I think that would have been a very logical landing place for Sam Darnold. Vegas was a logical landing place because of Carroll's affinity and for Stafford before, for Darnold before. But when you talk about affinity, Pete Carroll loves Geno Smith. He's the one that kept bringing him back. And even, we had the DUI thing that one year and stuck with him and just kept bringing him back and bringing him back. He was the first one that said, when they traded Russ, hey, everyone's talking about who we're going to go get. We have a guy in our own room. So that makes sense. And I guess now we know what they were talking about on that airplane, right?
Potentially, like, you never know, right? Like, it could be you could end up, in theory, you could end up with Tyler, Geno now, and DK all with the Raiders.
Yeah.
Like it's a real possibility. Pete may be reconstructing. So this is something that's just come out now from Dana Rossini. Geno Smith is expected to get a new deal with the Raiders, and it's going to be between $40 and $45 million per year.
I imagine that what Schneider and the Brain Trust of Seattle was probably comfortable doing was essentially an exact duplicate of the last contract.
Yep.
And Geno, I didn't think Geno had any leverage really at his age. And I didn't know that there would be anyone else out there willing to pay the money, but it all came together in a perfect storm. You can make the argument that if Pete Carroll doesn't get a coaching job in the NFL this year, that Geno's probably our starter week one, right? It's just that he knows him so well, and they have cap space. They have some pieces in place on defense. They have a ton of draft capital. Like, I thought Sam Darnold was going to be the guy to kind of kickstart that rebuild down there. Turns out it's Geno Smith. The
interesting part in all of this too is we think about Clint Kubiak and the comments that were made at the press conference about Geno as this attracting factor, and now you're really understanding that. Yeah, he may have been if the price was right, but the reason Sam Darnold also, I think, is probably going to end up being in Seattle, and I think that's going to happen relatively quickly once free agency does open, is because Clint Kubiak coached him in San Francisco with that team.
He was
there is that connection there.
Yeah.
And everything I've heard out of Minnesota is they're okay with Daniel Jones. They're okay bringing him back and running it back and doing a reclamation project with Daniel Jones. And Sam Darnold resets a quarterback room. He is 7 years younger. Like, he is only, I believe, 2.5 years older than Tyler Shuck, who's in this draft class.
Right.
So you get a guy that's played in the league now for 7 years. That's the age of a guy that's potentially coming out. And I really like Tyler Shuck, but if you get Sam Darnold in this, and that's what I think is really the pivot here, I think it's going to be very interesting to see how this resets Seattle, because last night with the show I had with Michael Thompson and Brandon Kane, we were all talking about DK and what this DK trade looks like if it goes through, and how do you justify paying a Geno Smith, a more established veteran quarterback, if you're trading away one of the win now weapons in DK Metcalf.
Yeah.
Now we kept saying, hey, well, if they trade DK, there's a chance they trade Geno. This leads to DK's comment about QB stability as a wink, wink, nudge, nudge. This may actually have been one of the things, is he knew that this was potentially going to happen because everything had gone so quiet with Geno that they were going to move Geno, and I want to go somewhere where there is stability. And Geno was the stability for DK. I think now it's a factor of DK is now probably gone. more so than ever.
Okay. You kind of jumped ahead to where my next question was going, but that wasn't the take that I was expecting. What I was going to ask you is, do you think there's any chance that one of the reasons DK wanted out is there's an issue with Geno Smith? And that by moving on from Geno now, and maybe that's what precipitated everything moving so quickly on this front in the last 24 hours, with Geno out of the way now, and if they can assure DK that Sam Darnold's going to be in here, right? He said he wants to go somewhere where it's a contender with a more stable quarterback situation. How about a 27-year-old starter under a 3 or 4 year deal with another guy drafted behind him, and a team that's won 10 games last year and barely missed the playoffs? I mean, that's a contender. Maybe don't you think there's a chance that was part of the dynamic and they might be able to convince DK to stay now?
They might, but I think the biggest part with the DK is, again, this market. DK, if he starts to decline, you're really on the hook. And the other part of this, and Brandon Kane brought this up, and I had thought about it, but he really brought it up and brought it last night to our show, was what are you going to do in 2 years where you have DK on a potential $32 million deal per year, and JSN comes calling, and you're going to put $60 million into two receivers?
Right.
It doesn't make a lot of sense. And I don't know if DK fits this offense as well as some people may think, based on if you look at the history of this offensive scheme, whether it's Shanahan, whether it's McVay, whether it's, Matt LaFleur or Kevin O'Connell in Minnesota, the big physical presence in the receiving core comes from the tight end position. It does.
Yeah.
It doesn't come from your X or your Z. Your X and your Z need to be really good route runners and great at finding their way through zone coverages. You look at the receivers they've had, whether it's Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, Juwan Jennings, Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua, Robert Woods. You look at all these receivers that are in these offenses that are a derivative off of the Kubiak, Mike Shanahan tree. They all have common denominators, and I don't think DK fits in that denominator.
Yeah, you got to be a good route runner.
Yes.
You got to be precise in your routes. Yeah, that's I think that makes a lot of sense. And now you have to wonder if, do the conversations just continue, right? Are they talking about DK as well? And
potentially.
And they just couldn't get it done today. They're like, one trade for today, we'll pick this back up tomorrow. Because certainly, to make DK happy, and John Schneider was adamant last night. He said, obviously, we want to try and take care of the player and respect their desires, but that's secondary to what's best for the team. And so if DK says he wants to go to a contender, and most people don't consider the Raiders contender, well, maybe they will with Geno Smith and a bunch of draft capital and $60-70 more million to spend. So who knows what's going to happen next? But here's the immediate impact that this has on the roster. Trading Geno Smith before June 1st, the Seahawks now, as we sit here today, have $63.4 million in available cap space.
Yes, because the Raiders took all $31 million of Geno's deal.
That's what DK Metcalf still on the roster. You trade DK, and this is where it gets, hey, I've said this before on the show. I'm as emotionally attached to these players as most people. I get to interact with some of these players in a way that some fans don't. But I've just been doing this so long, and I've been a fan for so long. I get emotionally attached too. The players only play a finite amount of time. The team lasts forever. And so sometimes you have to make tough decisions, and sometimes the best decision for the team, which ultimately leads to it being the best decision for the fans because it leads to winning, is moving on from popular players at times. And so I immediately shift into what's next. And that excites me. There's a lot to talk about now over the next 6 weeks, right? As the Seahawks move into free agency in the draft. But if DK doesn't change course, if this doesn't impact his desires at all, and they are able to get a trade for him, the Seahawks 72 hours from now could enter free agency with $81.3 million in cap space to spend.
Yep.
They could do whatever they want. They could just tell Drew Dahlman's agent, hey, take the highest offer you get and come back to us and we'll top it by 10%. And they could go out and sign Jonathan Allen, who's now a free agent, and plug him on the defensive line. We know they tried to trade for him a couple of years before they got Leonard Williams. What I'm saying is nothing is off the table. And you sign Sam Darnold, he's going to eat up part of that. But first year of a deal, it's not going to be that big of a cap hit. You can have a 27-year-old starting quarterback coming off a year in which he was in the MVP conversation for much of the year. And has all this football left to play in front of him, and 80 million or 70 million in cap space when you take Darnold out, plus now 9 picks in the draft, including 4 in the top 100, and more to come if they trade DK. Like, for the fantasy football fans out there, the ones that throw all these crazy trade ideas at us all the time that are just, some of them are ridiculous and some of them are fun and some of them are realistic, they have to be loving this.
Well, it's interesting because I'm just looking at this. So right now, Dan, I'm obviously on Twitter on the side here seeing all the stuff, and I'm sure you are. G. Scott just put something out there that's kind of interesting to me, and it leads to something I had heard, and I wasn't 100% sure, again, if it was baloney, the things I was hearing from sources. Okay. But he writes, bet DK doesn't want to get traded now.
Okay. I mean,
and so what I had heard were, over the last year and a half, Geno and DK did not see eye to eye a lot. There was some friction in that relationship. And so I wonder, to an extent, if DK you may be right, he may stay now because Geno's gone. It could be the opposite of the stability. Yeah. It's just interesting because G is very connected to those players and that team. For him to come out and say something like that now kind of sends the antenna up a little bit.
There's still the question of the contract. And I do think this is the way John Schneider operates, that DK Metcalf and his agent know exactly how far the Seahawks are willing to go. That doesn't change based on anything that happened today. And so it'll be a matter of like, look, if you like the situation now, you want to stay here, all you have to do is say yes, because the negotiating is probably over. That's just the way the Seahawks kind of operate.
Well, it's interesting too, because the thing that I find interesting about the compensation is a 3rd round pick for Geno. We're talking about a guy that's going to be 35, and he's only got 1 year left on a deal. That's a really good return for that. Like, that's more than what I thought if they were to trade Geno, I should say, sorry, that they were going to get. I thought maybe a 4th, maybe a 5th. If you're going to trade him, that's probably what you're going to get just based on age and the contract. To get the Raiders to take all 31 million, to get a 3rd round pick in this draft, it now changes a lot of how you look at this draft for Seattle. And I think this also finally signals another thing. Even though they may bring in Sam Darnold, they are going to draft a quarterback this year.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think John's been hinting pretty strongly about that. His comment yesterday that some of the guys that they weren't really deep in study on threw better than he expected, sent him back to watch some tape. So I kind of think they were leaning that way anyway. It's just that now it becomes even more evident. Here's the Tankathon has already updated the draft picks. And so the pick that the Seahawks got from the Raiders actually came in a deal that they got from the Jets. And so the Seahawks now have 18 in the first round, 50 in the second round, and then picks 73 and 82, the 9th and 18th picks in the third round. So they now have 4 of the top 82 picks in this draft.
So that's, again, really good compensation. Jordan Schultz, who initially broke this, I believe, the Seahawks began and engaged with contract negotiations with Geno Smith all week. So from the combine, all this week, they were in negotiations. Seattle was not willing to come to the number Smith desired. And while the two sides quietly explored destinations, and so then basically Pete Carroll has always been a fan of Smith, while the two have maintained a friendship even after Carroll left the team. Tom Brady was also on board with the move to acquire Smith. So Brady signed off on this, which is, again, is interesting because he has such a stake now in this organization with the Raiders.
Yeah.
So Pete convincing Tom to sign off on this and give up the compensation and do these things, it's really interesting to me. But this also tells me that I think it really came down to a hard number for Seattle where they went, okay, like, we're at this crossroad. And it's the same analogy you and me have talked about for a while now, that I think when they moved off of Pete and they brought in Mike McDonald, John Schneider had a mandate to try and win with this roster as is currently constructed by him and Pete.
Yep.
Just like Jerry DiPoto, and I know that's going to hit some sore thoughts with a lot of Mariners fans, myself included, kind of got the same mandate when he came in. And then he slowly was able to recreate the image. This is what you're seeing now. I think John has been given the green light. Okay, if you're going to do this in Mike's image, then you need to commit to it now because this is where we're going to give you the opportunity. It can't be 2 years from now. It needs to be this offseason. And that's why I think you're seeing the Geno trade, Tyler being released. Like, they are really going to pivot into the Mike McDonald, now John Schneider vision of this team, which I think they are going back to being a physical football team.
Well, and they're going back to being a bold football team, like being the aggressor, just not waiting around. You know, the moment that they realized that this thing might not work out the way they wanted to, they took action. And to me, that's the sign of a good general manager, right? Like they don't want to rebuild, but they had to make a move now. And it's one that a lot of fans have suggested. I've had people telling me for months, that, if you could trade Geno out and get Sam Darnold in, you'd save a little bit of money potentially, but also gain 7 years, as you mentioned. I just didn't think there would be a market for a team that would trade for Geno Smith. That's why I always dismissed those conversations. I mean, I thought might have been a possibility, but then not the way they were talking about in this offseason, and not when you look at the options that are available, right? And where our draft capital is. And so I just didn't think, and that's why I was a proponent for extending him on a short-term extension, keeping him around, lowering the cap hit, but start drafting guys so you have the next guy. Well, now, I mean, they made that move that I scoffed at so many fans suggesting. So, sometimes we're right and sometimes we're wrong. And I'm kind of, in a very sick and twisted way, because this is just kind of the football nerd I am, I'm sort of glad that we're wrong, because this is fun.
This is fun, and this is really going to be like John Schneider's offseason. Like, he's got to get a lot of this stuff right. Yep. But you know what's interesting too, and this is something that I mentioned way back when they fired Ryan Grubb, and you and me talked about it, Dan, was Pete Carroll's first year in Seattle. He came in, he took over the Mike Holmgren, Jim Mora team, and he ran it with Matt Hasselbeck and Jeremy Bates. And Jeremy Bates and Matt Hasselbeck didn't have Pete's vision of offense. And they went into that offseason, they fired Jeremy Bates, and then they, at that point, because his contract was up, they released Matt Hasselbeck. And they went with Tavares Jackson. They reset their QB room and so on.
Yeah.
And I said that, hey, with Ryan Grubb, there's a good chance when they bring in Clint, whoever they were going to bring in ended up being Clint Kubiak, there's a chance they may switch at quarterback and go, if we're going to reset our offense entirely, we're going to reset our quarterback position, and this is the opportunity to do it.
But to me, because they don't, because of that mandate from Jody Allen and ownership, they can't just roll the dice, right? And that's why, to me, the point you made right at the beginning of the show, Grant's making it here on the screen, John Schneider knows that they can get Sam Darnold. They know the number they want. They know that Sam views it as an attractive destination. It's pretty much down to either that or Tennessee now, with the Rams and Raiders solidifying their spots. Those are the only two that make sense. So do you want to go to a team that is so bad they fired everybody and have the first pick in the draft, or come to a team that's on the verge of, a playoff spot with an exciting new young coaching staff and a scheme you're familiar with? It's a no-brainer, I think, for him and for the Seahawks. So
just now, Albert Breer has come out. The idea of Sam Darnold going to Seattle has a lot of traction in league circles as sort of the second-order move to the Seahawks trade of Geno Smith. Yeah. We'll see if it happens, but the word obviously set off some of these dominoes.
Like I said, where's a better place for Sam Darnold?
There isn't. No. There isn't really.
Those jobs
He's going to know the system. He's already run it this year. The Kubiak system is more of, actually, O'Connell's derives off of Kubiak's. He's going to come in, and I know people are afraid of it, and I know there's some scare in it. I think Sam Darnold, yes, he's maybe not as good as what Geno was, but I don't think he's a far enough step back that all of a sudden you look at this and go, oh, crap, we're running Sam Howell out there, or Drew Lock, or one of those guys. I think Sam Darnold, in the right system with the right players around him, can be very successful. We saw that this year. Now the question will be what occurs with DK. But the fact you've got Albert Breer and a lot of these national guys already talking about the league circles are already figuring out that Sam Darnold, you're probably right, Dan, and I'm going to find out. I'll text some people tonight to see if this move was made directly that, hey, as soon as free agency opens or the legal tampering period, Sam Darnold's going to end up a Seattle Seahawk. Yeah.
Yeah. And they're going to draft a guy. 100%. In fact, what I was going to say earlier is by them making this kind of a bold move, this kind of a swing tells you the commitment is there to the style of play that Mike McDonald wants to play. And so they're going to set this roster up so that when the draft rolls around in 6 weeks, if they want to take Jackson Dart at 18, they can take Jackson Dart at 18. right? I think they're going to set themselves up to be able to do whatever they want to do. And I think you're going to see them be very, very aggressive in free agency on Monday in a way that some fans will be surprised by. But,
so here you go. Here's another thing, and I'll just keep popping this in here so everyone gets it.
You're our news correspondent.
Of course, apparently. So what I initially thought with, and what I heard was that Seattle felt Geno was $35 million with incentives could push him to 37, 38. That's what they were looking at. Albert Breer just basically confirmed it for me. The Seahawks were far apart in negotiations with Geno Smith. Seattle were closer to around $35 million per, and Smith's camp wanted 45. They were $10 million apart.
Wow.
That's not minor. That is huge. And this is then what basically Geno and his camp came and said, we want to go to Pete Carroll and the Raiders.
I know you got to go soon. Let me know whenever you have to. But in the
meantime, got about 10 minutes.
Okay, cool. Want to get to some starred comments here. Thank you for the donation, James. I'd like to believe it's all part of the plan mentality, but we are purging the team at an alarming rate. I would say the moves that we've made this week are very, very typical offseason moves that every team makes. And the Seahawks always end up making 5 or 6 of these every offseason because the way they structure contracts, it allows them to move on from players if they're just not, if the value on the field doesn't match the dollar amount, right? And so that I think it's been pretty typical up till this point. The Seahawks have one of the highest numbers of players under contract for this year currently to this point in the league. Their roster is pretty intact. There aren't the gaping holes all over the roster. And so I think the moves that they have made, they've been very dramatic, right? We lose Tyler Lockett, a guy like Draymond Jones, who was their biggest ever free agent. I just think they've been more impactful instead of some of those under the radar ones. Megan Aussie 12 Gow Kroger. Hope I said that right. Thank you for the donation. Hey boys, had a feeling this may happen ever since Pete landed in Vegas. Not sure I want Sam Darnold, and does this now mean DK stays? I'm a little confused. We touched on that. Your gut right now, Bryce, tells you this might change the DK formula a little bit.
I think it will. I think this is where DK's quarterback stability. I think I just got a couple texts out right now. I'll see if I get some response back. But I think that's what he knew this was coming. And, I think that's going to be the interesting thing. And so Rossini has just put out another thing saying that the likelihood is Sam Darnold, if he does come to Seattle, will be on a 3-year deal. But it'll be on a 3-year deal less, closer to the number Seattle wants.
Yeah, 3 years, 100. I bet they can just print out that same exact contract that Geno signed
and give it to
2 years ago and just change the names, right? Yeah. It was 3 years, $105 million max value, right? But it was like an easy out after 2, and I think it's the same deal. I do, and that it makes a ton of sense. Dominic says, and we did just touch on this a little bit. This is kind of what I was talking about. Does this make us optimistic now about John Schneider's free agent view this year at being aggressive? And if so, what our cap looks like and how well to attack free agency now? It's funny that Pete Carroll's down there being all aggressive now, making moves like this, because my first thought as I was reading this was that, we had come to think of Schneider as being a little risk averse over the years because they failed at so many of those big swings and big moves. And in particular, ever since the Malik McDowell selection and the Jamal Adams trade, they've just seemed to have taken the cautious way to just about everything that they do. But I think this does indicate, as I touched on earlier, that John Schneider is fully committed to giving Mike McDonald the team he wants. And I do think you're going to like what they do starting Monday in free agency. I do.
I agree. I think this is very much going to be a aggressive free agency approach. And I even think an aggressive draft approach too, to really address these areas and fix a lot of the issues that have been here. Because I think what's occurred is it's kind of that complacency factor. When you're in a relationship and you've been with someone for a very long time, you kind of get complacent in the way you do things because, it's good enough. It works enough. Like, we're winning enough games. We're making the playoffs and we're winning one playoff game and we're good enough. And then you get into a new relationship and that individual goes, this is a fault. This is a fault. This is a fault. We need to address this. I think that's exactly what's happened with Mike McDonald. He's come in and gone, okay, so I tried to win with this. Here's all the faults. And they're the same faults I told you that were there at the beginning of the year. Now let's actually go and fix this, because if we fix it the way I want to, this is the result. Look at what I did with the defense. When you finally gave me the linebackers I needed, we went to being a top 10 defensive unit towards the end of the year. I think that's now what you're going to see. And with all the offensive change they've made on that staff, I think you're going to see that. And here's the other interesting piece to this is I think of all the places for Sam Darnold to go, you're going to go to an offensive staff that understands the system you are most comfortable running inside and out. Jake Peets understands it from McVay's perspective and working with McVay, right? So
absolutely,
everywhere he turns in this offense, they understand the offense that makes it work best for him.
Shane asks about Daniel Jones. Maybe he'd be under some consideration. I just think the Sam Darnold dots are too easy to connect and makes a lot more sense. I don't think you're moving on from Geno Smith because you have Daniel Jones in your back pocket. If they didn't have Sam Howell on the roster, maybe he'd be an option to come in and compete with a draft pick if we weren't talking about Darnold here. But Sam Howell's still there and he's still a thing, and he'll be competing with whoever else they bring in. Any new updates, Bryce?
I'm just looking right now. I'm looking to see if anyone's come up with anything kind of new. Nothing currently, but yeah, the updated spot rack has Seattle at $62 million in cap space, the 7th most in the NFL.
Yeah, and as I mentioned, that still includes DK Metcalf's full salary. If he's traded, they save $10.9 million. And then they still haven't made a decision on Noah Fant. There's no way he's going to play on that $13.4 million cap hit. So either he gets a new deal or he gets released or traded. And they haven't restructured Nwosu's deal either. So they still have some levers to pull to clear even more space.
No, it's going to be very, very interesting. And the more traction I'm seeing on here is the Sam Darnold side of it. Like a lot of these league tapped in media sources are saying like, that's what's been kind of going on since the combine. So this has been probably brewing for a while. But here's the other thing that's kind of coming out is now the Raiders, they feel, aren't pressed to go get a quarterback now in this year's draft if they're not sold on anybody. They may take Genty at pick 6.
No, that's a great call because they were, even with Shedeur kind of falling in some people's eyes, the farthest anyone had him falling was the Raiders at 7. Like that was the floor. And right. And so, yeah, that could cause a domino effect. If Tennessee decides to go Cam Ward and Cleveland doesn't like Shedeur enough, he could fall. He could be in play at 18, for goodness sakes.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see how this kind of, plays out. But what I'll say is this offseason is going to be extremely intriguing all the way up to when they play their first regular season game, because I think there's going to be a lot of turnover on this roster to some points, but it'll be interesting to see how it all shapes up.
There's a lot of discussion in the comments, and it all just comes down to there's a lot of discussion on a certain topic, and it's just people throwing out who they think is a good quarterback and who's terrible. So it's, I'm not going to get into that roller coaster because there's people that hate the Darnold idea already. There's people calling for Russell Wilson to come back.
Oh yeah.
There's, I guess that was to be expected. They're just people that don't pay attention to actually what's happened. That'll never, ever happen as long as John Schneider's the GM and Mark Rodgers is Russell Wilson's agent. Let's just get that straight.
So here's another interesting tidbit though, Dan, connection wise to the Raiders and why it makes even more sense that Geno ended up there outside of Pete Carroll is Geno Smith's relationship with Chip Kelly from this past year with his cousin playing at Ohio State.
That's right. His cousin
Geno was very included into that kind of background on what Chip Kelly was doing. And Chip Kelly's now the OC with the Vegas Raiders.
Yeah. Huh. I mean, there's, people want to talk about quarterbacks, probably have to move up for Dart. Who knows? I could see Dart. In fact, who was it? Not Jordan Reed, guy on NFL. Oh, Charles Davis. Charles Davis is a very knowledgeable. Used to work in front offices, like really, really in tune. Did his first mock draft for NFL.com yesterday, and he had Cam and Shedeur going in the top 6, and he had the Jets taking Dart at 7. So I've seen Dart mocked now from 7 all the way into the 50s, right?
The thing that I'm just so shocked about is that they actually went through with it and they've actually committed to this reset. Now, I won't call it a rebuild because there's a lot of pieces on that defensive side. There's a lot of young talent on this roster.
Yeah.
But for years, they keep saying that we're contending, and they never made the moves to really push that needle and address these things. This, to me, seems like an entire organizational reset, that they realize we're not where we keep thinking we are. We need to take that step or 2 steps back to align things to take 4 or 5 steps forward.
Yeah, I'm still trying to catch up mentally. Like I'm just blown away. I honestly, even though I think about everything, we talk about everything. That's part of the fun of having a show, right? I just never thought all these dominoes would fall at the same time. Played around with them. Trust me, for those of you who might watch my show and think, oh, Dan's got to eat some crow because he said we weren't going to trade DK and he said Geno was going to get an extension. If you could have follow me around with a secret camera, right, you would have seen over the last 6 months how many mock drafts I've done, how many cap calculators I've done over the cap, where I've gotten rid of DK, gotten rid of Geno, right, done those numbers just for fun. So yeah, I've thought about it, man. Long and hard. I just can't believe it happened. What do you got?
So Albert Breer came out with this, and this was like, and Albert Breer is very connected with Seattle. I want everyone to understand that. Like, he's probably one of the most trusted reporters. The Seahawks opened trade discussions with the Raiders with this blockbuster proposal. This is how it all started.
Oh, geez.
Geno Smith and DK Metcalf to Vegas for Max Crosby.
Wow.
Vegas shot it down, obviously, because they gave the deal to Crosby and told Seattle that Crosby was not available off the table, but talks then still continued, which then led to Geno becoming a Raider.
Okay.
So John shot his shot. Like, he was literally pushing the chip. Like, if that's how you started your proposal, right? That is him taking a massive, like, franchise altering shot.
Yeah.
And then it still spiraled into a trade that occurred. And like, Albert Breer's not going to throw that out on Twitter just to throw it out. Like, that is literally how that started.
Yep. I know you got to go. I don't really have anything else. I just wanted to be able to react to this and get all your all's reaction. And pretty much the comments are all just a bunch of different guys that might be able to play quarterback for us. So, and those discussions will be fun to have. It's funny. I've got Rob Staten coming on with me Monday morning, and I was going to talk in my DK Metcalf reaction about how it might potentially impact Geno and whether or not this would be something that might lead to him being traded as well. But then I decided, no, I'm going to save that for Monday to talk to Rob about it, because that'd be a good subject for him. And, that's what I get for doing that. But I just can't believe it happened.
Yeah, I can. And Jordan Schultz just put out another thing to add to it, which now explains the messages I got late last night when I was almost falling asleep. DK requested his trade last night. So they started this proposal without really thinking of it actually going anywhere with the Crosby. It died. But then because the extension didn't work out and the contract negotiations weren't working, this is where it ultimately ended up.
Yeah. Well, and now John Schneider's got to earn his money. This is what GM
does,
right? And his pro personnel directors and their staff and everything else. So just gives us a lot more to talk about over the next few days. Right. I was planning on taking the weekend off, but I'll be here for you for breaking news. But that's but that's just the way it goes sometimes, right?
It does. We're going to be on tonight at 8:30, me and Ryan, to kind of break this down and see if there's any more news coming out.
That's a good note to end on. Make sure, if you guys don't already watch Bryce and Ryan and what the guys do over at Hawks Home Rundown, you should anyway. So get on over there and subscribe and check out their show tonight, where I guess you'll be talking a little bit more about this.
Just a little bit.
Yeah. Thanks, Bryce. Appreciate you being with me on short notice. Thanks to all of you for watching. Be sure to hit that bell so whenever I go live, there's an emergency pod, something like this, or a new episode, it's there. Forever and always, go Hawks.
Go Hawks.